There is something psychologists are only now beginning to understand about people who were teenagers in the 1980s. This was not just another decade of growing up. It was the last era of true adolescent anonymity, and it shaped a generation's brain in ways we are still unpacking. Let's start with something most people overlook. When we think about teenage identity formation, we assume visibility equals validation. More documentation, more sharing, more proof you existed. But teenagers in the 1980s prove that theory completely wrong. Think about it. You are 16 years old, and your Friday night exists only in the memories of whoever was there. No photos uploaded instantly, no stories posted, no check-ins announcing your location. You could reinvent yourself every single weekend because no permanent record followed you around. You could try on different personalities, make embarrassing mistakes, say stupid things, and by Monday, the only evidence was word of mouth that would eventually fade. This was not just privacy, it was psychological freedom. And neuroscientists have discovered something remarkable. When adolescents develop their identities without constant external documentation, they form what is called an internal sense of self, one that does not depend on likes, comments, or external validation to feel real. Now imagine you are standing in the fluorescent glow of the mall on a Saturday afternoon. This was not just shopping. This was your social laboratory. You learned to read people across crowded food courts, to sense which group of kids you could approach and which ones would shut you down with a look. You learned the unwritten rules of territory, which stores belonged to which crowds, where you could linger, and where you would be invisible. The mall taught you something schools could not: how to exist in public space without supervision, how to navigate social hierarchies in real time, and how to handle rejection when you approached the wrong table and were frozen out. What researchers call social calibration skills, you just called knowing how to read a room. But here's where it gets interesting. You would come home from school, drop your bag, and flip on MTV. And for the first time in human history, teenagers had a shared visual language that their parents did not control or even understand. You were not just listening to music. You were absorbing aesthetics, attitudes, and ideas that shaped how you saw yourself and the world. That 3-minute music video was not passive entertainment. It was identity formation happening in real time. You learned that style communicated something, that how you presented yourself to the world was a choice you could make deliberately. This scarcity created something powerful: anticipation, investment, the understanding that not everything meaningful should be available on demand. Your brain learned to hold on to experiences, to replay them mentally, to treasure what was fleeting. This is what psychologists now call savoring, the ability to extend and amplify positive experiences. You were not learning it from a mindfulness app. You were learning it from waiting for your favorite video to play. Then there was the mixtape. You would sit by your boombox for hours, finger hovering over the record button, waiting for the exact right song to come on the radio. You would carefully sequence tracks to tell a story, to communicate something you could not say with words. When you handed that tape to someone, you were handing them a piece of yourself that took hours to create. This was not just music sharing. This was emotional labor as communication. You learned that meaningful connection required effort, that the best gifts could not be instantly generated, that patience and intentionality made things matter more. Modern algorithms serve up personalized playlists in seconds, but your brain was wired to understand that curation, that the act of choosing and sequencing was itself a form of expression. Now let's talk about the phone mounted on your kitchen wall. That phone was a battlefield and a lifeline. You would stretch that curly cord as far as it would go, ducking into closets and around corners, knowing full well your mom could pick up the other receiver at any moment. Privacy was something you had to fight for, negotiate, earn. And when you finally got your own phone line, maybe with call waiting if you were lucky, it felt like genuine independence. But here is what that experience taught you. Conversations had weight because they required commitment. You could not text someone while doing 5 other things. You had to be present, fully engaged, listening and responding in real time. You developed what researchers call active listening skills, not because anyone taught you, but because the technology demanded it. Those phone calls that lasted for hours with your best friend built a capacity for deep conversation that quick text exchanges simply do not replicate. Picture yourself in your bedroom, the door closed, lying on your bed with your Walkman. Those foam headphones, pressed against your ears, were a portal to a private world nobody else could enter. For the first time, you could carry your emotional soundtrack with you, choosing exactly what you needed to feel in any moment. You learned to use music as emotional regulation, not as background noise, but as deliberate medicine for whatever you were going through. Psychologists now study how music affects mood and cognitive function. You were conducting those experiments on yourself every day, building what we would now call emotional intelligence through careful attention to what sounds matched what feelings. And then there was the Cold War humming constantly in the background. You would watch The Day After on television and feel something shift in your chest. You grew up with the genuine possibility that everything could end, that the world as you knew it might not exist tomorrow. This was not abstract anxiety. It was existential awareness at an age when most kids today worry about their follower counts. But here is what psychologists have discovered about generations that grow up under threat. Many of them develop what is called post-traumatic growth, not despite the anxiety, but because of it. You learned young that tomorrow was not guaranteed, that moments mattered, that waiting for someday was a luxury you could not always afford. This created a specific relationship with time and meaning that shapes how you approach decisions, relationships, and priorities even now. But not everything was heavy. Remember the feeling of finally beating a video game after weeks of trying. No save points, no walkthroughs, no YouTube tutorials. You died, and you started over from the beginning. You died again, and you started over again. That game didn't care about your self-esteem. It demanded mastery through repetition, through failure, through the gradual accumulation of skill that couldn't be shortcuts or hacked. What psychologists call frustration tolerance, the ability to persist through difficulty without quitting, was being carved into your neural pathways every time you picked up that controller after failing for the 100th time. You learned that competence feels different from participation, that earned achievement satisfies something deep that handed success never touches. Here is what made the 1980s teenager psychologically unique. You were the bridge generation. You grew up analog, and you watched digital arrive. You remember life before constant connectivity, and you can compare it to what came after. You experienced the last era when boredom was unavoidable, when waiting was mandatory, when identity was formed in private before being performed in public. This gave you something invaluable: perspective. You understand intuitively what younger generations have to learn intellectually. Not everything needs to be documented. Privacy has value. Presence means more than proof, and some experiences are richer when they exist only in memory. Your brain was shaped by a world that no longer exists, and that shaping created resilience patterns that researchers are only now learning to measure. You know how to entertain yourself without a screen because you had no choice. You know how to wait because instant was not an option. You know how to form identity from the inside out because no algorithm was there to shape it for you. The psychology of the 1980s teenager is not just nostalgia. It is a blueprint for capacities we have systematically engineered out of modern adolescence. You are living proof that scarcity creates appreciation, that limitations foster creativity, and that the absence of constant documentation might actually be the presence of authentic selfhood.